Oh child. There's stuff all over this table and this house. My house looks like a hot mess. And that's okay. That's okay. It is a-okay. I'm okay with that. Hey y'all, it's Ashley Bookishrealm and I'm back with another video. So as you can see from the title of today's video, God, it's cold in here too. I have a lot going on right now and that's perfectly okay. So a couple of days ago, well, it won't be a couple of days by the time that y'all see this video, but a couple of days ago, I asked a question on Instagram, as I always do, and people have no idea why I ask these questions sometimes, but at this point I feel like y'all should know. If I'm asking you a question on Instagram, it's probably because I'm using it for a video, and that is a-okay. Nothing wrong with that, right? Nothing wrong with that. So let's talk a little bit about the worst books that y'all read this year. Not me, the worst books that y'all read this year, because, you know, my worst books of the year is definitely coming on both of my channels. I have one on this channel and one on my Roma Comics because I like to keep them separate because of criteria at which I rate a manga, graphic novel, or comic is going to be significantly different than my prose books here. But I asked y'all, what was the worst book that you read this year? And y'all had some very interesting responses. All right, so we're going to do probably about 6 to 8. I typically take about 6 to 8 reactions or 6 to 8 responses that I typically get. I got a lot of responses this time around because I feel like y'all felt strongly, but I typically do 6 to 8. So we're going to choose 6 to 8. Some of these I'm not surprised. Some of these I'm like, dang, dang. But it's all right. All right, let's jump into this first one. This is an interesting one because I also did not like this book, and it is one of the authors that I have a toxic relationship for, which is interesting because the release that they had this year I really loved, but the release that this person mentioned, Survive the Night by Riley Sager, holy moly, I also did not like this book. I felt like this book made absolutely no sense. It made no sense, my friends. Absolutely no sense, okay? I know a lot of people like Survive the Night. I think Brie actually ended up liking Survive the Night because I believe it was me, Brie, and Kayla. We ended up reading this book together for Lala's book club, and it just didn't work for me. So I could understand the green face emoji and being like, ooh, Survive the Night. I just felt like the POVs kind of ruined the story and it just was not logical. So when I read Survive the Night, I was like, so when this passed through an editor's hands and you read this book made sense? Because it didn't make no sense to me whatsoever. It didn't make any sense. But I guess when Riley Sager's name is attached to it, at this point, who cares if it makes sense? Because we all know Riley Sager is going to sell. But yes, I concur. Survive the Night was not a good book. The next one that I'm sorry, I just looked down and I see the name attached to it. As y'all know, I don't reveal the names of anybody just for privacy purposes and just because I don't know if people want their names attached or associated with the responses that they give. So out of respect, I do not. But this person is a good friend. I really want to text them and be like, what and why and how? Like, I didn't even know you read this book, but apparently there is a book called The Orc Secret Baby. What is that? Listen, I don't think I've read many monster romances, maybe a handful, if that. I would probably say anywhere between 2 to 3. And so I am not well versed. I read Morning Glory Milking Farm this year, and every time I just think about that book, because it is exactly what you think it is. So monster romances, I think it can be quite interesting and entertaining, but apparently you did not find this interesting. I have never heard of this book, and so now you're making me want to read it just because it's you. And what in the world? The Orc Secret Baby? That's no. Okay, all right, let's do another one. This one is a shocker to me because I am planning to read this book and I haven't gotten the chance to read it. I love food. I'm a foodie person. I love reading books about food. I particularly love cozy mysteries that feature food. They're romances that feature food. Those are the two like genres with food wrapped into them that I really enjoy. Food-based manga is another thing of mine. So the do's and donuts, the do's and donuts of love is one that had been on my radar because of the content, the author. I think the cover is absolutely beautiful. So I'm really interested in knowing why this was your worst book of the year. That makes me super nervous because, like I said, I really did anticipate this one. I think the cover is gorgeous. I think the premise of this is absolutely fascinating, and yet it was the worst book of the year for you. So that makes me quite nervous. The next one is I co-sign, and I think the community is kind of like in the middle of this one in terms of whether people like it or not. There's a lot of conversations about it. It's been a lot of popularity about this one. We all knew it was going to be the Goodreads Choice Award winner, and if you probably can guess, I will pause right here. Pause for 5 seconds. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Guess. And if you thought of Fourth Wing, you're absolutely right. Fourth Wing did not work for me. This is going to be on my worst book of 2023. I just feel like structurally this book made absolutely no sense. I wasn't a huge fan of the writing. I felt like it was too long. It was too convoluted. I just couldn't get from point A to point B without reading it and being like, I don't understand why this is even a thing, because nothing about this remotely makes any type of sense. And so, of course, it just wasn't for me. I think this is kind of like, once again, half and half thing. Like, people either like it or they don't like it, and I'm sure that there has been some even significant conversation surrounding Ironflame. I do not plan to read any more books in the series. I gave the first one like 2.5 stars. For me, that is too significantly low for me to even want to pick up the second book. If it would have been a 3.5, I would have given it the opportunity and the time, but for me, just not the series for me. If it's for you, it's for you. I get it, but not for me. Not over here. The next one that I have here is interesting because I read the first book in the series and did not enjoy it. And I read the first book in the series years ago. At this point, I believe there's 5 books in the series, and the dislike of, I don't know which one this is in the series, mind you. I'm not sure which one this one is in the series. And it's The Hand on the Wall by Maureen Johnson. This is a young adult mystery / thriller series. It wasn't for me. I was kind of bored with the first one. I pretty much was like, I didn't, when I read it and I reviewed it, I did not understand the hype behind the series. And after reading the first one, which I did give 3 stars to, I'm pretty sure I gave the first one 3 stars, it just didn't grab me enough to have any interest in considering reading the rest of the books. I don't know how people feel about them. I know that they circulate well. I know that people are fans of them. But outside of that, I don't actively seek out the series, so I don't know much about how the rest of the books have performed. But The Hand on the Wall was one of y'all's worst books of 2023, which confirmed for me there's no need for me to continue because I trust this person and their taste and their reviewing. And so yeah, no, we're good. I'm done. Twilight. Now I'm curious, like, if this was like your first time reading Twilight or if this was like a reread, because I remember when Twilight came out when I was in high school. I used to sit in my AP chemistry class, which my poor AP chemistry teacher. I'm not a math or science person. How I ended up in AP chemistry, it blows my mind because I have no idea how that even was a thing that I was allowed to do, which is fascinating. Although I think I actually did okay on the AP exam, which also quite fascinating. But I read Twilight in the middle of getting taught AP chemistry. I read all of the books while I was supposed to be paying attention in that class. I used to have the book underneath my desk, and it was enjoyable when I was in high school. We're talking, at this time I was probably like 15, 16 years old. I was significantly younger than, if you're wondering like how I was in AP chemistry, it's a whole age thing that I'm not going to get into today. But I was only about 15, 16 years old. And so at that time, of course it was entertaining with the movie franchise coming out in full force by the time I was freshman, sophomore in college. I reread it in 2020 with Bethany and quite a few other people. It makes you question. It makes you question, like, how no, did this get published? But one of the interesting things about Twilight that I always say is that it is pivotal to the world of young adult. You can't deny its impact, how it changed the face of young adult literature, and so it will always have its place in history. I personally, like this person, just don't think that they are good books. Edward is a very, very strange creature. Can't even call him, he's not human. So very, very strange creature, very weird stalkerish vibes, very much so inappropriate behavior, very much so engaging in a toxic and controlling relationship that definitely sets the precedent for a very harmful and abusive relationship, which is just not good. So like you, I haven't read Twilight in 3 years at this point, since I reread it in 2020. I don't ever plan to reread the books. I know that there was talk a long time ago about her potentially continuing and doing more books. Child, I could care less. I ain't finna pick it up. I ain't finna read it, and I ain't finna put my coins into it, because absolutely not. Absolutely not. Now, this one is funny because me and the person that I'm about to talk about, we actually kind of read this book like back to back. I read it first and then they read it, and we were communicating about reading this book. And it is also one of my worst books of 2023. I think that they knew this, and I'm not surprised to see that this was the worst book for them for 2023, and that is Spare by Prince Harry. Y'all, I typically am more, I think, agreeable or more nuanced when it comes to autobiographies, because it's, you know, someone's space to tell their story and you can't really judge their story. But I judge the hell out of Harry. I am so sorry. I've read quite a few memoirs this year. I typically try to get in between like 5 to 6 memoirs in a year, and this year I've read quite a few, whether it's from entertainment industry, political side of things, and in this one we have royalty. Well, I mean royalty by blood at this point, because this whole family, I feel like they just you know, they just kind of disowned his behind. But yeah, I do actively search out memoirs, and I find them to be intriguing. It's a very good insight to how people perceive themselves. It also gives you insight to how media can twist or really influence our perspectives of influential individuals, and it's their opportunity to kind of tell their side of the story. But Harry should have saved this one in the drafts. I did a full-blown weekly review where I rounded up what I had been reading for that week, and Spare was one of those specific titles. And I took a long time dissecting and speaking about why I think Spare was just a hot mess. It was a shit show, not something that I actively can imagine myself picking up anything else. I know that when Harry signed the publishing contract, he actually signed a 4-book deal. I don't know what the other 3 books are going to be about. I could care less. I don't care if he or Meghan writes them at this point. Doesn't matter to me, because at the end of the day, I just could not get past some of the things that he was saying and feeling, I guess, enlightened in his thought process. And really it was like, no, I think you should have taken some more time and really thought about this before you put pen to paper, because this ain't it, sir. This was, oh my gosh, this was not it. His perception of other people around the world, his trying to deconstruct from some racist ideologies that he had been brought up in, which we all know the monarchy has some both very overt and implicit racist behaviors and thoughts. But Harry's not, he ain't out of it long enough. He hasn't done all of the work that he needs to do, and you can specifically tell this about certain things that he was discussing. Plus there was this long part, I believe it was part 2. Now I'm so far removed because it's been such a long time since I've read the book. But I believe it was part 2 where Harry begins to talk about his military experience. And y'all, oh my gosh. First of all, it was a slog to get through it. It was incredibly boring. And then on top of that, I just didn't like how he talked about a lot of people from the Middle East. Wasn't my cup of tea. And so I am not surprised, my friend, that you also did not like this book, because we've talked about it. It definitely will be on my worst books. The next one that I have here is an author that I'm still on the fence about, and I've been riding the fence on her for a couple of years now, and I may or may not plunge into reading her next year. Haven't really decided, but it is Love on the Brain by Ali Hazelwood. I have heard so many highs and lows about Ali Hazelwood to the point that I have no idea what I want to do in regard to her. I think eventually it's just going to be me either diving into a book and seeing for myself, or me getting to the point where it's just like, you know what, actually I just don't care enough to even want to pick up a book by her. I could care less how anything turns out. But Love on the Brain was not your cup of tea. I think one of the biggest criticisms that I always hear about Ali Hazelwood is that her books often read alike, and so I'm wondering if your perception of Love on the Brain, was it similar to all of the other books that she has done? Was it a writing style? I would love to know more about this, because most of the people that I communicate with, that I'm friends with, associates with in the book community, are very on the fence. Like, you either love her or you're really like, nah, I'm all right. Like, people read her first book and everybody was in love, and then they kept reading more of her stuff and they're like, wow, so we just have a blueprint and we're just going to insert 2 different names every time we write a book. She does have a young adult book, which is her first foray into young adult literature. I may or may not check that out. Talia Hibbert did the same thing this year, where she primarily has written adult romances, and she dove into her first young adult romance this year. And for her, I think that that specifically worked out, but I'm very biased because I think Talia Hibbert is a very, very good writer, and I enjoy most of everything that I pick up from her. Ali Hazelwood may or may not work for me because I have not read her, so I'd have to get a feel for her writing style, whether I feel like most of her stuff is just a blueprint, and whether she can jump from writing adult to young adult. Because what people don't often realize is it's not only difficult to jump and write different genres, it's also difficult to jump and write different age categories if you're not skilled at it. It's a different writing style. It's a different mood that you have to capture. You're keeping a different age demographic in mind, and so that is a huge shift, I think, for a writer to be able to do that. Although there are writers who are able to do that across the board, and I think that a lot of that has to do with training and practicing, and then also having specific skill sets. Okay, we're gonna do 2 more. This one is a very popular one. I've heard mixed things about this one. And I've heard mixed things about this one from fellow librarians. As you all know, I this year have been primarily reading young adult children's picture books, a lot of graphic novels, comics, and manga, and I kind of took a little bit of a step back from reading a lot of adult literature. And it's not that I don't read adult, it's always fascinating because even at work I get asked like, do you even read adult books? I do read adult books, but I think because my brain is so hyper fixated on making sure I'm in the know about children's literature that sometimes I forget to kind of shift back and be like, I can too read adult books. Like, I can read books that where I am the target demographic, but I have so much fun reading children's literature, youth literature, that I often forget the shift. And so a lot of times I miss out on the wave of popular adult books that get a lot of hype. And this is one that has received a lot of hype, and from my fellow colleagues as well as from the community, this seems to have very like split feelings about it. I know that it's already gotten adaptation, and that is Lessons in Chemistry. I think the concept of this one is rather intriguing. I don't think I've read a lot of STEM-based books, and a lot of that has to do, like I said before, I'm not a science and math girly. My brain just doesn't function like that. And so while I find them interesting, they're not books that I technically like actively seek out. But I know a couple of people who really enjoyed this book, and there are a couple of people who I know who are like, yeah, absolutely not. Like, no, I didn't like it. And it's so fascinating to see these perspectives, especially with these books that get like critical acclaim, or books that end up on the New York Times bestsellers list. But then of course it has to do with a lot of sales, and I mean, sales can increase based off of word of mouth and books being hyped up, not necessarily based on reviews, which directly correlates to the issue with Kate Coray. Like, if she only realized, sorry to bring her up, but if she only realized that that's not how book sales work. People are not actively searching out reviews anymore. A lot of it has to do with word of mouth recommendations, a lot of hype, because I was saying hype and popularity at the same time. A lot has to do with hype and popularity, and people are not actively looking at reviews. And I think we see that instance with Lessons in Chemistry, where there are people who absolutely hate this book and have given it horrible reviews. But at the same time, there's this element of, you know, passing along, like, read this book, you must read this book, the adaptation piece to it. And so it's maintained its popularity, and a lot of people want to read it just to find out for themselves. I don't know if I will actively go back and read Lessons in Chemistry. It just may not be for me, but I'm going to take your word for it, because I feel like it may not just, it just may not be for me. It may not be for me. And this last one, I have to include because my friend, what? This was not the response I was expecting. So I said, what was your worst book of the year, right? And I got a response from someone who said, most of them. Literally, that was a text. Most of them. My friend, I feel for you, because I think some people have had this year. I've seen a couple of videos where people have talked about like 2023 being a very mediocre reading year for them. And I'm wondering what that is. This is not a isolated incident. I have heard a number of people say that 2023 was not their reading year, and I'm wondering what that is. What element of publication this year has made these releases, or even if you're reading back, like what has it been? And part of me wonders or questions whether the ability of social media now to move books very quickly, to, you know, change sales, to change popularity. You know, you have one person say this book is fascinating, it goes viral, and then all of a sudden everybody's reading it, and, you know, out of curiosity we pick the book up, and it's really not that great of a book. And so I wonder if that has anything to do with it. I think what is most interesting about this whole idea of hyped and popular books is that I always think about the audience that's recommending it. And so typically for me, it is not where I get my recommendations. And I'm not saying that this is for this person who made the response, this is not saying that this is what happened with you. Your response just made me think about a couple of different things. And what is social media doing to reading? What has it changed about reading? And that's something that I want to think about next year, because next year, you know, I'm going to be focusing a lot on new release material next year, not necessarily just for you know, this video purposes. That's not it. A lot of that is me thinking about work and wanting to stay on top of new releases so that I can better be prepared to do comping and stuff like that. That's just me. And so I'm wondering, like, what drives something to be popular? What is it? What is the special sauce? What is the secret ingredient that is making people really hype certain books up? And I wonder if it then is a conversation about these books that are actually very well written, great character development, great plot development, just overall cohesiveness. What makes a good story, and why aren't these books maybe getting the hype? And that's not to say that hype books aren't good, because for example, this year I've read a handful of very hype books, and I actually thought that they weren't bad. Like, they were solid reads. Some of them I absolutely adored and thought, like, yeah, this is it. This is the special sauce for me that makes a book great. And it also boils down to individual, because what I think makes a great book, the next person may not. But just this idea of how much social media now is changing what we pick up, how we consume books, and what we define as being a good book or not a good book makes things very interesting. It changes the game for a lot of things, y'all. I'm very interested in that. But my friend, I am so sorry. I am so sorry that 2023 has not been a good reading year for you. My hopes and my wishes is that maybe 2024 will bring forth a clean slate, and that you will find some things that you really, really end up enjoying next year, and that you will not have the same response next year. That maybe most of the books that you read in 2024 will be good books. All right, y'all. So let me know in the comments down below, what was the one book? Give me one book, or you can give me several, whatever you feel like. What are some books that you read this year that just either were the worst books you read, or, as I always do, I do the worst and most disappointing, because sometimes a book is not bad, but it was a disappointing read for me because I had higher expectations. I have one that I literally just finished, the conclusion to a series that I'm very, very excited to talk about in my video, because I rated every book in this series 4 to 5 stars, got to the end, and it was a complete letdown. Still a 3.5 for me in terms of rating, but it was one of the most disappointing things that I read this year. Not the worst thing, but most disappointing. As always, make sure you keep an eye out. I will be doing my worst books of 2023. I may not do it by the time December ends because I like to literally wait until the final day, because I have had instances where I literally have encountered one of the worst books that I've read towards the end of the year, and so I don't want to rush it, and then, you know, within the last 2 weeks I read a book and I'm like, oh my god, it was awful. So I tend to wait a little bit longer, and I will probably do mine the first week of January. Same thing with my best of. I usually like to save those for the top of the year as opposed to getting them out at the end of the year. But looking forward for the end of the year content, I'll be doing just, you know, my reading plans, some new release videos. I also want to give y'all 24 books that you should read in 2024, not me, because we all know that I can't stick to a TBR, but I'm excited to give y'all some recommendations for books that you should check out in 2024. All right, y'all, as always, if you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you want to see more content from me, click the subscribe button, hit the bell for notifications. And if you're looking for ways to support the channel, all the links will be down in the description box below, and I'll be back with another video soon. Bye.
I'm on my own, broken and alone. I feel the rain crashing down all around.